The night of June 11, 1962 began like every other night on Alcatraz Island. The cold Pacific fog rolled in off the bay. The guards made their rounds. The lights went out. And somewhere inside the most secure federal prison in American history, 3 men were already gone. They didn't blast through walls, they didn't overpower guards, they didn't fire a single shot. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, Clarence and John, simply disappeared. And in 50 years of searching, the Federal Bureau of Investigation never found them. Not their bodies, not their trail, not a single definitive answer. This is the story of the most audacious prison escape in American history, and it is a story that still has no ending. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary sits on a 12-acre rock in the middle of San Francisco Bay. The water surrounding it runs at 54 degrees Fahrenheit. The currents are brutal, unpredictable, and fast. The shore is more than a mile away. When the Bureau of Prisons opened Alcatraz as a federal penitentiary in 1934, they made one thing perfectly clear. This was the end of the line. You didn't escape from Alcatraz. You served your time. You counted the days. Or you died trying. In 29 years of operation, 36 men attempted to escape. 23 were caught. 6 were shot and killed. 2 drowned. 5 were listed as missing, presumed dead. Not one confirmed escape had ever succeeded. The island wasn't just a prison. It was a symbol. A message from the United States government to every criminal in the country. There is no way out. Frank Morris had heard that message before. He'd been hearing it his whole life, and he never believed a word of it. Morris was not an ordinary man. Abandoned as a child, shuffled through foster homes across the Deep South, he had an IQ that prison psychologists measured at 133, higher than 98% of the general population. By the time he reached Alcatraz in 1960, he had already escaped from multiple correctional facilities. He was sent to the Rock precisely because authorities believed nowhere else could hold him. They were wrong. Morris began studying Alcatraz the way a chess grandmaster studies the board, not looking for brute force, looking for the one move no one had seen, and he found it, not in the walls, not in the gates, but in the ceiling. But the ventilation shafts above the cell block were old. The concrete around them had been weakening for years, corroded by the salty ocean air that crept into every corner of the island. Morris discovered that with enough patience, enough slow, quiet, relentless work, the concrete could be loosened, chipped away, quietly, carefully, invisibly. He recruited the Anglin brothers, Clarence and John, who had been friends since their days in a Georgia prison. Together, the 3 men began one of the most meticulous escape preparations in the history of American crime. They worked only during the 30-minute music hour each evening, when inmates were permitted to play instruments. The sound of harmonicas and guitars covered the scraping of metal against concrete. Night after night, week after week, for months. They made tools from spoons and improvised drill bits, slowly boring through the concrete surrounding their ventilation grills. They built a workshop above the cell block, in the utility corridor above their cells, completely hidden from the guards below. Up there, in the dark and the cold, they assembled what they needed for the night they would finally leave. They built life vests from more than 50 stolen raincoats, stitching them together by hand. They constructed a 6-by-14-foot rubber raft from the same material, a vessel that would have to carry 3 men across one of the most dangerous stretches of water on the Pacific coast. And then, they made their most chilling creation of all. Papier-mâché heads, using plaster, paint, real human hair collected from the prison barbershop and whatever materials they could smuggle back to their cells. Morris and the Anglins crafted lifelike decoy heads. They placed them in their beds, covered with blankets, facing the wall. In the dim light of a guard's routine bed check, the heads looked convincingly human, convincingly asleep. The night of June 11, 1962 was foggy. The bay was dark. At approximately 11:30 in the evening, the 3 men slipped out of their cells for the last time, climbed through the ventilation shaft, scaled the roof, and disappeared into the darkness of Alcatraz Island. They left behind a fourth man, Alan West, who had helped plan the escape, but couldn't get his ventilation grill loose in time. He was left behind. He would later tell investigators everything. The next morning, June 12th at 7:15, a guard approached cell 138. He called out to the figure lying still under the blanket. No response. He reached in and grabbed the shoulder. The head rolled off the pillow and hit the floor. The alarm went off at 7:18. The FBI launched one of the most extensive manhunts in American history. Agents searched the shoreline of San Francisco Bay. Boats combed the water. Helicopters swept the coast. A Norwegian freighter reported seeing a man floating in the bay near the Golden Gate. The Coast Guard investigated. Nothing conclusive was found. On Angel Island, 2 miles north of Alcatraz, investigators found fragments, a makeshift paddle, pieces of the rubber raft, a waterproof bag containing photographs and addresses, personal items that belonged to the Anglin family. The items were wet. They had clearly been in the water, but there were no bodies, no footprints, no eyewitnesses, no evidence that 3 men had made it to shore, and no evidence that they hadn't. The official FBI position held for decades was that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers drowned in San Francisco Bay. The currents, they argued, were simply too strong, the raft too crude, the night too cold. No man could have survived that crossing on a vessel made of raincoats. But the case was never closed, because doubt, once it enters a story, is very hard to kill. In 1969, a man matching Clarence Anglin's description worked briefly on a farm in Brazil. In 1975, a woman told investigators she had received a Christmas card signed with names her brothers had used as aliases. In 2013, 51 years after the escape, the U.S. Marshal Service received a letter, written in shaky handwriting, claiming to be from John Anglin himself. The letter said all 3 men had made it, that Frank Morris had died in 2008, that Clarence had died the year before, that John himself was old and sick and willing to turn himself in, if the government would give him just 1 year in a low-security medical facility. The FBI ran forensic analysis on the letter. The handwriting was consistent, the grammar was consistent, the personal details were accurate, but they could not definitively